have a great HOA and Karen video for you today, and you're going to love that title story too. Here's our first one. Our neighbors are an absolute nightmare. Is our HOA genuinely not doing their job, or am I being impatient? Posted by the Drunkest Kook. For context, we built a new home and moved in fall 2022. Prior to this, our now next door neighbors finished their home and moved in a couple weeks before us. We'd occasionally go visit our home as it was under construction and immediately noticed our next door neighbors put an old chicken coop and a disabled SUV in their backyard. The chickens are unbelievably loud and they squawk at all hours of the day. Along with this, there was a ton of general trash and clutter, tarps and scrap wood, plastic bins, and so on. We were initially panicked but thought that they would eventually get this cleaned up as they settled into their home during the coming months, as we knew the HOA CC&Rs allowed none of this. The HOA also requires all initial landscaping to be completed within 3 months of ownership, so we thought that they'd be starting that process as well. Nope, never happened. Only became worse. Throughout the rest of the year, we were reasonably preoccupied settling into our home, and then winter came where there isn't really any good reason to be enjoying your backyard in 5-degree weather. We knew the issues at our neighbor's house persisted, but assumed that they'd be getting things cleaned up in the spring. As 2023 rolled around, nothing at all was done. We tend to take a very live and let live approach to things, and we know our neighbors have several children, so we gave them the benefit of the doubt and assumed that they would start cleaning things up eventually. In late March of 2023, 2 of their kids were climbing on the large rock retaining wall that we have in our front yard. Wanting to keep my home insurance premiums low and not wanting one of them to fall and injure themselves, I went outside and I politely asked them to stay off of the rock wall. The very next day, I hear a loud commotion out front and I go outside to see what's going on. The same 2 kids have pulled roughly 30 rocks out of the retaining wall and thrown them onto the ground. Much sterner, I tell them to put the rocks back immediately and stay off of the wall. As I'm walking back inside, I realize their mother is on the front porch. I was honestly so stunned that she'd let her kids do that and I couldn't even just say anything. At that point, as said, enough is enough. We're reporting everything to the HOA. I called the HOA and reported the 9 violations in total. The HOA said that other people in the neighborhood complained several times about this house and stated that our next door neighbors always talked about how busy they were or how some last-minute emergency came up every time they were notified of a violation. I asked the HOA about timelines, and they walked me through the process of letters and warnings, final warnings, and fines. It seemed like stuff should at least be improving within 6 to 8 weeks at the very latest. Fast forward about 2 months to the end of May. Nothing at all has changed, and the chickens are loud as ever. I called the HOA to get an update, and I learned that they had my complaints on file, but nothing had been done about them as the person who took my complaints had recently resigned. They say they will start working on these issues, and I reaffirmed the 6 to 8 week timeline to begin seeing improvements. I also sent them video clips of the chickens and all the noise that they make, several clips from several different days, along with photos of the status of the property. In the meantime, the neighbors park a recreational vehicle in their backyard as well, also not allowed per the HOA CC&Rs. Skip ahead to July. Minimal progress has been made. The truck had been moved to the front of their house and was illegally parked over the sidewalk. This is now 2 violations. You can't have a disabled vehicle viewable from any lot, and any vehicles must be parked in accordance with county laws. The only other change was that they brought a landscaper out to regrade their backyard because, as they stated to the HOA, the land developer had ruined the initial grading with their equipment, so therefore they couldn't begin landscaping their backyard. I can promise you, the developer never came close to this lot. Anyways, still no progress, and the chickens continue making noise endlessly. I contact the HOA again, and their COO assures me that they're working on these violations, and they stated that our neighbors moved into a neighborhood with an HOA and will need to follow the regulations. My initial thoughts were that we're finally going to get this whole mess cleaned up and we'll be able to enjoy our back patio in some peace and quiet. Again, nothing happens, so I follow up in an email with new chicken videos and I simply ask what date I could expect this issue to be resolved. The response I received was the complete opposite of what had been previously communicated and contradictory to what is in the HOA CC&Rs. I asked for clarification. They stated that they're in violation due to an unapproved structure, the noise the chickens make, and the waste they produce, but there isn't anything explicitly stating that chickens aren't allowed. Don't get me wrong, I am fine if our neighbors have chickens, but I don't want to have to deal with the byproduct of their chicken ownership. If they have a soundproof and HOA compliant structure that they keep the chickens in, that is completely fine with me. Another couple of weeks go by, into early August now, and I ask 2 questions. What date the neighbors have been given to reach compliance and what options they've been given. No response. So I wait a week and I send another email. No response. I wait another week and I follow up, and I finally get a response at 5 p.m. on a Friday that doesn't answer either of the questions. Just standard boilerplate, "Oh, we understand how frustrating this must be for you," and blah blah blah. So I follow up the next week and basically saying, "Hey, thanks for getting back to me, but I'm just hoping to get clarifications on my 2 questions. No response. I wait another week and follow up again. No response. I wait another week and I follow up again and today and finally get a response from the CEO just now saying that my emails, once a week at the most, are bordering on harassment, that they have no updates on resolving the chicken issue, and that he is instructing his staff to ignore communications from me until they have an update. They won't tell me what progress they've made, what stage they're on, if they're dining our neighbors, and so on. Keep in mind, this is only related to the chickens, as they are far and away the biggest nuisance. No dialogue or discourse has occurred regarding any of the other violations since June. We are absolutely exacerbated and exhausted. What is my recourse here? Do I need to get an attorney involved? Am I being a Karen? Now, there isn't a board affiliated with this HOA, and it's just a property management company that runs several HOAs. The annual board meetings are the executives from the HOA company and the land developer. Do you agree with this comment and OP's response? Now that I think about it, if you throw up a fuss that causes new owners to not want to buy, the management company will be more motivated to do something. Oh yeah, that is an interesting idea, OP says. The real challenge in this is that we are the only people who are affected by them, so no other neighbors really understand what's going on. There are no houses behind us or on the opposite of them. And by and large, the average property value in the neighborhood is over $1.5 million, so people tend to take exceptional care of their property. Except these people. I really don't understand. How do you think OP could escalate this? Let me know what you think. Terrible HOA President Storytime by Root Investigator 6630. My HOA president does not like me. For a year, we were lied to about something that was not in the CC&Rs. They maintained the old documents that were no longer applicable on the HOA website to justify their ACC denials. A year after I was denied a particular improvement, I mentioned to the ACC that I would be submitting a request for some projects, including the one I was verbally denied of a year ago. I was told that as long as a previously denied improvement was XYZ per the covenants, I was approved. The HOA president started calling my contractor and harassing them about one of my projects, telling them I had not been approved, even though I had written approval. I found out in the process of doing my other project, the one that was denied last year due to it conflicting with our covenants, that the previously denied project should have never been denied because it was not restricted in our covenants. Once I found that out, I told my contractor to alter it so that a portion of the project was no longer XYZ, but XY. I've received a letter from their lawyer stating that I need to remove that portion of my improvement, which is not XYZ, because that's not what I got approved for. I don't feel I should remove it because I was lied to for a year about a restriction in our covenants that does not exist. Do I have an argument? I'm trying not to give any identifying information since some of my neighbors use Reddit, so I'll use this explanation. I submitted a request for a concrete driveway. I was asked what kind of concrete I would be using, and I told them regular concrete. I was then told that I couldn't use regular concrete for my driveway because the CC&R state that you can only do an exposed aggregate driveway. When I went to check the CC&Rs, it also confirmed what the ACC had said about exposed aggregate driveways being the only kind of driveway permitted. We went to speak with the board, but they denied our appeal, saying that we had to follow the CC&Rs. We even went as far to ask if the portion of the driveway that couldn't be seen from the street could be regular concrete because we really needed a driveway and couldn't afford a completely exposed aggregate driveway. We were still told no, because we needed to follow the CC&Rs. In order to save up more money to afford it, we waited a year and mentioned our interest in the driveway again while we were requesting something else. When the ACC came to speak with us, the driveway was brought up and we were approved to proceed with it provided it was exposed aggregate like mentioned in the CC&Rs, and we agreed. After the construction of the driveway began, we found out that the CC&Rs that were mentioned were the wrong CC&Rs and that the only one that was actually in effect was an incomplete copy and did not show the filing signature and the date that would come up after the old one. I was furious. I'd been lied to and made to incur more money for something that was not in the current CC&Rs. I contacted my contractor and I told him that since we already had the materials, he should make the front portion of my driveway exposed aggregate and to make the back portion transition to regular concrete. I received a letter from the lawyer saying that I have gone against what I was approved for and need to remedy it to fit my approval. Otherwise, they will pursue litigation. Do I have an argument? Just for more insight, other things happened between I and the board that caused unnecessary friction and frustration leading up to the time the driveway was being constructed. Do you agree with this comment? They have to file the latest bylaws and CC&Rs with the state. In New Mexico, it's the AG. If you're in compliance with those, I would think you can tell them to play in a litter box. And this reply is, depends on the state. Mine doesn't require them to get filled anywhere. And OP says, they explicitly told me to refer back to the CC&Rs because that's what tells them what is allowed and isn't. But the CC&Rs state nothing about material. How I destroyed my HOA. I don't know what it is about these HOAs, but I hate them with a passion. When I was growing up, any neighbor who dared to get up in another neighbor's business was treated like crap for eternity. I can still remember pelting Mr. Jordan's car with snowballs with the other neighbor kids because he was being such a busybody jerk. We never got in trouble either because, well, our parents despised him too. These days, that jerk would not pass go and be anointed HOA president for life. Anyway, I've been plotting to destroy the HOA for quite some time, but began to lose hope that it was here forever. And like the French felt about the Axis who set up camp in their country, just would have to settle for some minor malicious undermining of the jerks. Until a week ago, a major court decision was reached in Berger vs. Wincliffe where the HOA was killed off after 30 years because the original documents failed to provide an extension provision. Of course, the HOA just amended the documents with this provision, but the court, which I suspect might be hating these things as much as I do these days, said, "Screw you, you can't do that." Wow. I went into my basement where I keep these ridiculous HOA papers and I started reading. My documents were 32 years old and no extension provision either. But knowing the depths of denial these Karens and Kens are capable of, I looked up the lawyers who won that case and retained them. These guys are the top land use lawyers in the state, hired by the cities and towns to write the zoning laws, exclusively appointed by the governor to do the housing task forces. The real deal kind of lawyers you want for this crap. He wrote the legal memorandum and opinion letter, which I sent to every homeowner. A monumental victory for the value of my home and a very satisfying petty victory for me personally. Do you agree with this, to ask lawyers if you're entitled to repayment of any of the fees or the fines collected, especially after the HOA expired? I'd want money back, wouldn't you? That time, the company lawyers told me to contact law enforcement, posted my moral logjam. This took place years ago, but it still makes me laugh at the sheer stupidity of it all. It starts as all truly great sagas published on the internet begin, when I met a random guy through a friend at a bar in the city. Let's call the guy I met Mark for the purpose of this post. My friend had introduced me to Mark because for a few years leading up to that introduction, I shared an idea that I had for a business with anyone who would listen. I was told that Mark wanted to start his own business, had worked in the industry, knew a lot about the subject matter required, and thought that my idea was good. Mark and I met up for a lunch. We hit it off, and he said that he'd start the business as the CEO and agreed to me taking a part-time operational role. I agreed to help solely in a part-time operational role because I couldn't afford to quit my day job. I put in 15% of the cash for 5% ownership since Mark was going to put in founder hours, which is 80 plus hours a week, and agreed to put up 85% of the cash, which was more money than I could afford to risk on a new venture. So I worked part-time. I did what I said I would do, and I even tried to be of assistance on things that I had no experience with. I connected Mark with a fella that I'd done business with before, and we'll call him Paul. Paul and I got into a dispute ourselves. More on this later. Anyway, let's fast forward a few months, and I got into a dispute with Mark over stationery. Yes, stationery not being to his liking caused him to flip out. This was despite him picking the stationery out. Next up, the contract I got from Mark was not what we agreed. The legal work required a few months to get done, and I had expected delays, but when I finally got it, the paperwork didn't represent what I had agreed to own. Not only that, but my investment wasn't being acknowledged under the terms that we had committed to when I put the money in. Now, as I said, I wasn't able to risk much, and I only invested what I could afford to lose, so this wasn't a huge sum of money. I didn't want to make a big deal about it since the amount was small, and he began promising a new contract when the business could pay for the lawyers to make changes. I signed nothing. Then it worsened. Mark and I start to fight anytime we're in a room together. As I think back, it's almost comical how angry he would get in my presence. I have other things to do with my time than squabble over stuff like stationery, so I worked on my areas of the business and I hoped that things would grow. I stopped in whenever I could and would help out regularly as needed with as little Mark interaction as possible. Paul would intervene sometimes when Mark would get particularly difficult to be around. Anyway, fast forward about 2 years, and Mark can't help but tell everyone who will listen that the business is going well. I have no idea how well things are going because Mark isn't giving me any updates. So I get a call around Christmas from Mark, and he wishes me a happy holiday and then drops the bomb on me that he wants to terminate my involvement and refund my investment. I decline the investment refund and say that I'm happy to no longer work with him. In my head, I think it's kind of hilarious that he thinks that this will just end that easily, but I say nothing to that accord to him. Mark and I hang up with him aggravated about my refusal to take the refund on my investment. Mark then sends me an email that I had resigned. This had no basis in fact, but certainly was creative about what we had just discussed. I correct him immediately in a reply, stating that he wanted to no longer work together, and that I can see that being the case, but want to discuss my investment. A few days later, Mark demands that I come and pick up a check for a reimbursement of my investment. I do not come and get it. Next thing you know, the company attorney huffs and puffs and tries to scare me with some strongly worded letter. This is the same idiot attorney who screwed up my contract to work on the business and my investment agreement. Let's call this attorney Mr. Cohn for the sake of the story. I send an email response to Mr. Cohn that he screwed up and the company seems to be doing well, that I hear rumors about how well, that I want to be on this for the foreseeable future, and I will not take a one-to-one cash out for what I put in. The attorney then emails me back, stating in writing that Mark never accepted my electronic transfer into the company account. Instead, Mark has another company he accepted the money into, a company I've never heard of, a company that is different than the name of the recipient on my electronic transfer, a company that will be committing wire fraud to accept the money that I sent. On that note, I did some sleuthing online. I found out that Mark had been forming one company every month or two. Then there were media reports and documents that he let slip in shared drives that he forgot that I had access to from when we agreed to work together. Mark was too cheap and stupid to pay for tech help, so he was using my shared folders that I'd created, and I certainly wasn't obligated to turn off the shares if he wanted to work out of them. Those documents showed me Mark had recently raised money in the company that I sent the payment to at 200 times the valuation that I had bought into it at, and Mark didn't disclose my investment to the new investors. Mark had, however, put me on documents showing my ownership to the previous investors. Not on documents I had ever seen before, but documents that he'd been sending around. When I share my suspicions that Mark is committing wire fraud with Mr. Cohn, I am told that I am the one breaking the law by knowing anything about the investment documents the company had used. Mr. Cohn tells me that by not picking up my check, I will not be entitled to any money and to contact law enforcement if I think something illegal has happened. He cautions, though, that I'll be the one in trouble. Cue the malicious compliance. I let the different respective members of the Securities and Exchange Commission, along with law enforcement, know what had happened to me. I provided them with all of the documents that I had from the matter. It took about 5 years for the investigation to conclude, for charges to be brought, for a trial to conclude, and for Mark to go to jail. They say government is slow, but they aren't kidding with just how slow. Maybe it was slow because Mark was running a large, tens of millions of dollars large fraud? Anyway, Mark will be serving time for about 30 felony charges they found uncovering the details of his Ponzi scheme. He will be away for a long time. I never did anything wrong. With the information that I was able to provide, Mr. Cohn ended up getting disbarred. There were other things Mr. Cohn did outside of what is shared in this post that I cannot share, or it could help to identify me to the folks involved. The investigators credited me with bringing the fraud to their attention. I lost my money in this ordeal, but gained an education, and I got to help bring down a crook. The sheer stupidity of Mark is that he didn't even follow the business plan that I had. He just used it as a story to convince investors to give him money. It is a business model that works very, very well. It took a few more years, but I'm now in a position to be pursuing this business full time, with people of high integrity who all work together to ensure each other's success. We expect to have an extremely profitable year in 2023 after proving the business model worked in 2022. This comment just takes the cake here. Why don't you call law enforcement and see what happens? You don't say that when you're so full of crap. HOA blasts my window with a floodlight, so I ruin their entire property. Click the video on your screen. You do not want to miss this one, and I'll see you there.